Staying informed shouldn't feel like a chore.
Right.
You want the crucial details without, getting lost in the weeds.
Exactly.
That's what we're aiming for today. We're diving into this whole controversy around the Trump administration using the Signal app.
Particularly about the military strikes in Yemen.
Right. That information sharing.
And to get the full picture, we've really cast a wide net source-wise. We're talking New York Times, The Atlantic, Fox News, AP, Reuters, Guardian.
Even a Reddit thread from Army, which is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Plus Wired, Politico, Defense News, The New Republic, a whole bunch. And Wikipedia for that broad overview.
Okay, so our mission here is pretty clear. Figure out what happened, when it happened, who was involved, what info got shared.
And crucially, why it all blew up into such a big deal.
Exactly. By the end, you should have a really solid grasp of the situation and why it matters.
Oh.
Okay, so where do we even start with this? It feels complex.
Well, I think context is key here. We need to remember the backdrop. The U.S. and U.K. had already started airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen back in January 2024.
Okay, right. Setting the stage.
Then, fast forward to January 2025, reports start surfacing that Pete Hegseth, who later becomes Secretary of Defense, remember, had set up a private signal group.
And this is the first group we hear about, not the one that really hit the headlines later.
Correct. This initial one reportedly had his wife, Jennifer, his brother, Phil, and his lawyer, Tim Parlator.
Got it. So that's simmering in the background. Then things really seem to pick up speed in March 2025.
They really do. March 11th, the Houthis say they're going to start attacking Israeli ships again.
Okay.
Then, just 2 days later, you have Steve Witkoff. He pops up in that other Signal chat we need to talk about. He's actually in Moscow meeting Putin.
Interesting timing.
And then March 14th. Now, the focus shifts to this other Signal group, the one set up by Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor.
Right, the one that became infamous.
That's the one. They're discussing potential U.S. military action against the Houthis in this chat. And Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, she's in there.
And she's someone who's been very vocal about punishing leaks in the past, right?
Right, very much so. Which becomes, relevant later.
Okay, so that's the 14th. Then the very next day, March 15th.
Bang. The U.S. launches these significant strikes in Yemen.
And this is where it gets really critical, because reports say Hegseth then shared specific details about these strikes in his private Signal group, the first one we mentioned.
Yes, allegedly including things like flight schedules for the FA-18 Hornets.
Wow, okay. Sharing operational details like flight schedules, outside secure channels, while operation might still be underway, that just screams security risk.
Huge risk. And it looks like the Pentagon itself knew this kind of thing was problematic.
How so?
Well, just 3 days after those strikes, March 18th, a memo apparently goes out, basically warning people across the department not to use third-party apps like Signal for non-public, unclassified information.
Ah, so even if it wasn't top secret, if it wasn't public, it shouldn't be on Signal.
Precisely. The memo apparently said Signal was not approved for that kind of info, a really important distinction.
Okay, so the warning goes out, but the timeline keeps rolling. March 21st.
Yeah. Hegseth's chief of staff, Joe Casper, reportedly signs a memo asking for a leak investigation, even floats the idea of polygraphs.
Really? Polygraph?
Yeah. And the memo supposedly listed other leaks they are already looking into, like Panama Canal plans, stuff about a second carrier group, even Elon Musk visiting the Pentagon.
Okay, so internal leak concerns were already high. But the big public explosion happens on March 24th.
That's the day. The Atlantic drops the bombshell article. Jeffrey Goldberg, their editor-in-chief, was accidentally added to Mike Waltz's Signal chat about the Yemen strike plans.
Accidentally added, wow. And they published excerpts.
They did, giving this, unprecedented peek into these high-level, supposedly private discussions.
And the White House, did they deny it?
Nope. Same day, an NSC spokesperson confirmed the chat was real. President Trump, though, seemed to kind of brush it off, downplay the leak.
But Congress didn't brush it off.
Not at all. You had Schumer calling it a major breach, demanding hearings. Thune, the majority leader, said they'd investigate. Senator Reid called it an egregious failure. Big difference in reaction there.
Definitely. So Senate Intelligence Committee hearing the next day, March 25th.
Yep. And the media starts digging up old quotes from Gabbard and Ratcliffe about how serious leaks are.
The pressure's building.
And fast. March 26th, the House Intelligence Committee holds its hearing.
Okay.
Same day, more bad news. Der Spiegel and Wired report that private details, even Venmo connections of people in that Waltz chat got exposed.
Venmo connections. How?
Unclear exactly how, but it highlights the potential, digital footprint risks of using these less secure methods.
Right. The security implications keep stacking up.
And it doesn't stop. March 29th, Wall Street Journal reports Hegseth allegedly brought his wife to sensitive meetings with foreign military folks.
Okay, that adds another layer.
Then April 1st, Washington Post says NSC members, including Waltz himself, were supposedly using personal Gmail for government business.
Personal Gmail. Wow. Okay, this paints a picture of, let's say, informal communication practices.
To put it mildly. Then, mid-April, we see some fallout. April 15th, Darren Selnick and Dan Caldwell get put on administrative leave.
Linked to that initial leak probe.
Seems so. They put out a statement saying they were basically scapegoats, wrongfully targeted.
But the really big shoe drops on April 20th, right? The New York Times report.
That's the one. About Hegseth's second private signal group, the one we mentioned first.
Now, the key thing here is that this group also allegedly discussed the Yemen strikes.
Yes, and reportedly included his wife Jennifer, his brother Phil, and his lawyer Tim Parlator.
Who also has a Pentagon job.
Exactly. And this group apparently existed even before Hegseth became SecDef. This just poured fuel on the fire.
I bet. So by April 21st, everyone's reporting on this second Hegseth chat.
It's everywhere. And now the Pentagon's own Inspector General, the watchdog, is officially reviewing both incidents involving Hegseth and Signal.
What a timeline. Okay, let's try and untangle the who's who in all this and what specific info was supposedly flying around.
Right. So center stage, obviously, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, allegedly sharing those FA-18 flight schedules and other strike details in that second private chat.
With his wife, Jennifer Hegseth. She's a journalist, former Fox News producer.
Correct. And reportedly attended some of his meetings, too, also in that chat. His brother, Phil Hegseth, and his lawyer, Tim Parlator, who, again, also works at the Pentagon.
And this is after the first incident, the Waltz chat, where an account linked to Hegseth apparently shared weapon systems info and a timeline for the Houthi attack.
Exactly. Which brings us to Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. He created that first chat.
The one Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic got added to.
Right. And in that chat, you had discussions about military action. The Hegseth-linked account apparently pushed for quick action, citing leak risks.
But not everyone agreed.
No. J.D. Vance, the vice president, was in that chat, too. And he reportedly had reservations. Worried about the timing, clashing with messages about Europe, potential oil price hikes.
Did he say something like, I hate bailing Europe out again?
That's the reported quote, yeah. Adds a political dimension to the operational discussion.
Okay. Who else was key in that first chat?
Tulsi Gabbard, DNI. We mentioned her stance on leaks. She initially told the Senate hearing no war strategies were improperly shared in that chat.
Careful wording, perhaps?
Possibly. Then John Ratcliffe, CIA director, also in the chat, he apparently said Signal was authorized for the chat.
Despite his own past comments about the Espionage Act and mishandling info.
Right, a potential contradiction there.
And Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy. He was in it too.
Yep, and remember, he was meeting Putin around that time, also identified in the chat. Brian McCormack and Walker Barrett, both NSC staff. Barrett's Venmo links reportedly got exposed.
And Stephen Miller, Trump advisor.
Believed to be SM in the chat transcript. He apparently kind of shut down one debate by saying the president gave the green light but wanted Europe to chip in financially.
Okay. And then the guys involved in the leak investigation aftermath.
Joe Casper, Hegseth's chief of staff, who signed the initial memo, and Darren Selnick and Dan Caldwell, the two put on leave who said they were unfairly targeted.
Got it. So a lot of high-profile names sharing potentially very sensitive stuff. Let's talk about the controversy itself.
Well, the absolute core issue is sharing sensitive military operational details.
Like flight schedules.
Exactly. On a commercial, unapproved app with people who might not have clearance or even a need to know.
And the Pentagon's own guidance explicitly forbids this for non-public unclassified information. It seems pretty cut and dried on the face of it.
It does seem that way. Which is why the Pentagon launched its internal investigation. Now, the White House has tried to manage the fallout from the second leak.
Saying no classified info was shared, blaming fired leakers.
Right, but that hasn't really dampened the criticism. You even had John Elliott, a former Pentagon spokesman, write an op-ed basically saying the place was in disarray under Hegseth and predicting he wouldn't last long.
And the political reaction was strong, especially in the Senate.
Oh, yeah. Schumer calling it a major breach. Thune and Reid vowing to investigate, calling it an egregious failure. Very different tone from Trump's initial downplaying.
And specific criticism aimed at Hegseth.
Definitely. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's a combat veteran, called it singular stupidity endangering troops. Elizabeth Warren said blatantly illegal and dangerous.
Lisa Murkowski raised the partisan point, what if it was a Democrat?
She did. And Mark Kelly, former astronaut, called for Hegseth to resign.
Even former figures weighed in.
Yep. Hillary Clinton's reaction was reportedly, "You have got to be kidding me," drawing that parallel to her emails. Pete Buttigieg called it the highest level of F-up imaginable in terms of operational security.
Strong words.
John Bolton called the signal use stunning. Alex Wagner pointed out, what would happen to a regular soldier if they did this?
That brings us to the Reddit thread. What was the vibe there?
A lot of disbelief, really. Criticism of the perceived double standard rules for thee, but not for me kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, I could imagine.
And serious talk about OPSC failures, operational security. That chat name, Mouth Breathers and Mom Breeders, also got mentioned. Some saw it as, grimly ironic or foreshadowing.
Wow. Any other reactions? Elon Musk offered help.
Reportedly offered technical experts to figure out how Goldberg got into the Waltz chat.
And the whole issue of archiving these messages, are they official records?
That's a huge question. They're legally required to archive official communications. It's unclear if these signal chats were. Senators Wicker and Reid specifically asked the Pentagon IG to look into that.
And Trump's reaction to being asked about the review?
Dismissive. Told the reporter basically, don't bring that up again. Called it a wasted story.
And Waltz's statements about Goldberg were inconsistent.
Reports say his story about how Goldberg got added and his interactions changed somewhat. Just adds to the confusion.
Okay, so pulling all this together, what are the bigger takeaways, the broader implications here? Why should folks care?
Well, number one is just the raw vulnerability. Using insecure channels for government, especially military business, it just opens the door for breaches, for adversaries to potentially get hold of sensitive stuff.
That seems obvious, but clearly it happened.
Right. And the Pentagon review is looking precisely at that. Did they follow the rules on messaging apps, on handling info, on keeping records?
Yeah, it raises that fundamental fairness question again, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Do the same rules apply at the top as they do further down the ranks? That perception gap, highlighted on Reddit and by commentators like Wagner, can be really corrosive for morale and trust within the military and government.
If leaders don't follow the rules, they enforce on others.
It damages the whole system's integrity, and ultimately, this stuff can erode public trust. If sensitive operations are handled seemingly carelessly, people are going to question the judgment and competence at the highest levels.
So the findings of that Pentagon review are going to be really important.
Crucial to understand what really happened and what needs to change to stop it happening again.
Okay, so boiling it all down, we had sensitive military info about Yemen strikes shared on an unapproved app. Signal, involving people potentially without clearance or need to know.
Sparking massive controversy, raising huge security flags, and triggering investigations and calls for accountability.
Right. It really makes you think.
Yeah.
Well, with technology changing so fast, communication evolving, what are the real challenges now in keeping government information secure, in this digital age?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
And maybe more importantly, what kind of accountability actually works at all levels, from the top down, to make sure security and public trust aren't compromised like this?
A tough question, but one we absolutely need to be asking.